Hi, welcome everyone. Today we are going to speak with Sumit Amar. He is a senior director in Visa. Sumit has been building a variety of software systems since 1999 and have been leading engineering teams since 2007. His experience has advanced from coding ASICs, web crawler, e-commerce sites to building large-scale search advertising systems, cloud computing platform, and secure payment systems. Most of his work is focused on security and reliability in distributed and AI system. He has spoken to more than 40 technology conferences discussing API architecture, AI, ML, and NLP, JavaScript, and cloud computing topics. Currently, he is leading a multifunctional team at Visa. He worked at EA, Electronic Arts, and Microsoft. That's where I met Sumit first time when he was in Microsoft. So Sumit, let me start with my first question, which I noticed about you when we were working together. Like I noticed when at 6 or 7 p.m., when we were heading towards home, I used to see that you are coming back to office and then working whole night till 3, 4, going back, sleeping couple of hours, and then coming back to office. So what was the motivation working whole night? Were you scared sleeping alone in home? I remember you were not married by then.
Well, first of all, thank you, Rafa, for having me on your show. I appreciate the opportunity.
Sure.
Going back that time, 2007, 2008, probably that the time when we worked together. And even before that, when I had joined Microsoft in a different team, I did used to work odd hours. Sometimes I used to work these extra hours. I always wanted to do something more in terms of improvement in performance or security or just the user experience in general. I used to build user interfaces and APIs at that time. So I was nobody was asking me to do that. I just always felt that there was more that could be done. And also, the company was dealing with another a big competitor that we wanted to launch the product against. So that was a little bit of a motivation as well. But a lot of that was about strategy and direction that our leadership had at that time, that we wanted to be industry leaders in this particular product space. But I don't have any other specific, but yeah, getting scared at home, not really. That time I was alone and didn't have much other things to do. But looking back, I feel that it was probably not the right thing to do. I should have spent my extra time, learning some musical instruments or done something else. And but in hindsight, everything's 2020. But yes, that was a little bit of a background on that.
Interesting. Yeah, you were very, very motivated. And I'll say it's a self-motivation because I don't think there was a pressure as such in office for you to do something, in half of the time. It was
Yeah,
your
not
own
really.
calling.
Yeah, and we were in the same team, right? And I was a new dev lead when we first met in 2007. But yes, there was no extra pressure that we wanted to have to do that. And I also wanted to make sure that the team was not really learning these kind of practices, and we will talk a little bit more about that today as we speak.
Sure, sure. And I remember another thing which stayed with me about you was once upon a time you had a maximum number of certification, like all possible computer languages, any technology you used to have. I believe you were number one in the world or number two in the world, I believe, number of certifications somebody can hold, right?
Yeah, I actually had a second rank in the world in terms of certifications from a site called brainbench.com. And in
Yes.
addition to that, I had also done certifications from Microsoft, Oracle, and Sun. But my goal was never to really make a count of number of certifications and have this ranking and the trophies, etc. The real reason was when I was learning new things, I wanted to make sure that I can benchmark that. Yes, I do learn, know this thing. So I would go and write a test for it, and the test was free. So when I got second or third rank, I don't remember, but I had done a lot of certifications, and Brainbench then published my interview on their site, and they gave me a free subscription for another year. So I did more certifications after that,
Uh-huh.
and it was just to just basically check whether I had the learning and the knowledge or not, but not just to show any ranking list to anyone.
Sure. Yeah. No, that was very impressive that you were very self-motivated. So I want to know what was the source of your self motivation? Like, are you like this from the childhood? You're a very good student in school. What was
Not
it?
really. Yeah, that's a good question. Really, I was not a really super good student. I used to, go late in the school, and I used to sit in the back, and I was, not really the student who would always be getting the first, rank in the school and get A grades, etc. in the US equivalent. But but what I used to do was I had always studied at the towards the end. So only when I went to the grad school I started learning and studying some more than I was doing before. But to your question, how the motivation comes to me, I think the motivation comes from understanding the purpose or what we are really trying to achieve and what's the longer term goal, or what the impact of that work is going to be. And that was the source of my motivation. But it was not about tactical things that I wanted to achieve quickly. But yes,
Mm,
two-part question that you had. One, was I a good student? Not really. Motivation, internally comes in by understanding the purpose.
right. So it looks like once you came out of college, started working, you really got motivated and started doing all this, getting all this certification where it's no need for you to get certification because you already were working in Microsoft. So I'm curious again. Is anybody in your life who made these changes in you? Somebody who inspired you so much?
Um, yeah, I mean, I can remember a few people that inspired me. The people I had met and the people that I had worked with. So the person that I only had seen once, hadn't met, Bill Gates. I was always very influenced by his work, what he was doing. He was very active in philanthropy, and I listened to one of his talks in University of Washington, where some student asked him a question, and she said, "You know what, Bill Gates, I want to become like you." And then Bill Gates says, "Look, if you mean from the standpoint of money, etc." He said, "You only need a few $1 million to live a very comfortable life. After that, the money you make, it's now your obligation, your responsibility to give back and make good use of that." And I have always been very moved by that important point, that a lot of people can chase money in the terms of numbers, have millions, billions of dollars, but what you do with the money is specifically very important. What Bill Gates has done with his foundation, etc., I think that's a remarkable life that he has lived and led other people. So very influenced by Bill Gates in general, and about doing whatever you can, being very technical, being very hardworking, and then spending time and giving back. That's one. And the second, I have also been very fortunate working with some engineering leaders in Microsoft and then in Visa as well. One of my previous managers, Nitin Chandel, has been very influential. I worked with him under his leadership a couple of times, actually, two different
Which
companies,
company was that?
in Microsoft and also
Okay.
in Visa. So I've been lucky to work with him over there. And even Sachin Dhawan, my manager, I report to, also got to work with him in Microsoft as well. So these folks, the key distinction why I had been motivated by listening to them, by observing them, is because they could go and talk at a very high level, at strategic levels, and lead by example, but also be able to go deep as much as is needed. I remember Nitin, he was pretty senior. I was pretty junior at that time, first time I met him, and he was leading a large team, but he was also still writing stored procedures and debugging code. And then later on as well, he proved that he was able to deep he was able to go deep as and when needed. And that really tells you that these leaders are not just looking at moving people by saying, "Hey, look, why don't you go do that?" Rather, they'll show you that this is how it's done. So those are the, I think, two examples I'll give you. People that I worked with, and then the people that I have just been influenced by in general.
Very good. So I know you worked in multiple companies. You are working in Visa. You worked in EA,
Mhm.
and EA is Electronic Arts and Microsoft, and these companies are one of the best companies in the world. So I would like to know one good thing from each company you learned and you took it with you.
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So Microsoft is a company where people, first of all, the hiring bar is high. So to get in, you have to be really good. But then when you work with these people that are at Microsoft, you get to learn a lot of things from them. People are intellectually savvy, as well as they're not shy in presenting their opinions. They have healthy conversations, debates, and then at the end of the day, you get to make good decisions. So from Microsoft, I feel that that's a huge plus. You When you work there, you may not realize that, but when you start working in other companies, you start realizing that gosh, the people that I work with and learn from on the job is very high quality at Microsoft. So that's number one. The secondly, on EA's side, working at EA is a different experience because you have to learn from the players who are playing video games. You have to understand what do they want. They want reliability. There's a fraction of a second delay, and somebody will shoot you in the video game, right? So you want to make sure the infrastructure is solid. Multiplayer can be supported on one server, multiple servers, linearly scalable. So players' requirements or the end consumers' requirements directly influence your design, and that's something that was a big learning for me because I was building the EA game servers as services within the company. Um, Working at Visa, the number one thing that Visa anybody notices very quickly is the security and the focus on reliability as well. Imagine a case, right? You're standing in the long line at Costco trying to pay for your groceries that you've spent an hour collecting, and then your card doesn't work. Then what will happen? What kind of user experience will that be? What kind of faith will you have in a payments network when it doesn't work? But the good news is that it does not happen. It does not fail, and that is because there's a lot of focus goes on into securing as well as making these systems resilient. So the focus on building distributed systems that are secure and reliable is the number one thing that one learns at Visa.
Okay, so seems like in EA and Visa, both the places, its big emphasis was on the scaling of
Mhm.
the product because of the nature of their business was as such. So scaling and so other than technical, anything if comes to your mind, like in their management philosophy, because every company is very different, how different they were from each other.
I think I don't want to talk negatively about any company because I love all of the companies I worked.
Sure,
Otherwise, I wouldn't have worked with them so if I
sure.
didn't like them. So Microsoft. I will tell you the good things I learned in Microsoft. Microsoft gives you opportunities to have lots of internal, training or learning sessions. You could be in a high potential program in which you get to have special trainings for 3-4 days, and um, in those some of those trainings, I remember one thing I heard from one of the leaders. He was a CVP at that time, and he had been in the company for 13 years. I forgot his name. And listening to the session, and he says, he joined the company at equivalent of level 59, and now he was, I don't know, 80 or something like that, 70, or I'm not sure what level that he was. But he said the key recipe for his success at the company was growing others, making other leaders in the company.
Mm.
And that was the number one thing that leaders looked in him to do, and that's how he was able to grow very fast in 13 years from 59 level to level 80 is a remarkable achievement when you see that way. um, so I feel that in Microsoft, it's leaders, that managers I had, Abhijit, Sachin, Nathan, all of these folks had this thing in their mind that how much you know you growing other people, and how much are you unblocking others to have them become successful. And I think that's a very very good trait of learning at early stages when you're a new manager in
Right.
a tech company.
Okay.
Okay. And then on the EA side, I think the in EA, the focus now had, for me, engineering manager at Microsoft for several years, starting and building a new team in EA. One thing I learned was that there was so much of decision making based on how much the player's perception of the product was. So now, leadership also believes that you have to try to understand your customer, consumer actually, and then make decisions based on those requirements. Um, I don't know if I can give you any specific examples of how leadership's focus point was different, but it was largely driven by the players' first mentality.
Mm.
And my skip cloud manager, I think he became my manager also sometime, is Ken Moss. He was also at Microsoft for several years before joining as a CTO in EA. Um, but yeah, that's what I can tell you. On the Visa side, Visa has Visa's leadership principles, which are very specifically laid out about enabling and inspiring others, leading by example, treating people with respect, collaborating with other people, and inventing new things, um, and the basically making influence. And then your performance gets gauged based on leadership principles on how you did your job, and also based on like what you exactly delivered. So there's a what category of ratings and there's a how category. So that was a little bit different than Microsoft, where the ratings were based on mostly in the beginning phases, at least, was on what category, and less attention was paid on how you actually got those results to it. But it may not be true nowadays. And I also heard that Microsoft now does not have ratings, so you may have a different criteria of performance management.
Right, right. So yeah, I think once you left long back. I think how many years now since you left Microsoft?
2013, yeah.
Yeah, 13. Before I think the big change happened, I believe. Satya
Okay.
came and all that. Because now lately, when I left about 2 years back, every at least in I shouldn't say Microsoft, because as you know, Microsoft is 15 other companies are there.
Yeah, yeah.
Every group is their own company. So
Right.
there, our focus was very, very much on customer. And I
Mhm.
was shocked actually to see I was in Cosmos DB to see even the dev managers and PMs were directly talking to the customer, which was unheard few years back. Like we never see customers, right? We have lot of layer between us and the customer, but all those things is broken. Those things were broken, and direct interaction was there, and it was all good changes, make big difference, I think, in Microsoft, as we all can see.
Mhm.
It's doing very well. So interestingly, all these different places, companies you work, but your managers were ex Microsofties.
Well, it's like, interestingly, yes, it has been a coincidence, as well as, some of the people I followed also along. And then,
Right.
absolutely. In fact, some of the people that reported to me as well in these companies were from Microsoft. That's not a coincidence either.
Yeah.
So,
It's a big giant training center.
no, I think Microsoft produces really good quality engineers and managers, including yourself, actually.
Yeah, yeah, and they do train, I think, people very well, no doubt about that. Sumit, I know in your current team also, and before, you manage a lot of people as a dev lead, then you become as a dev manager, you manage managers. So as you know, our audience is new dev leads or dev manager who are just starting their career. I would like to hear a couple of advice from you
Mhm.
for people who are just becoming a new dev lead, that what they should change about themselves. They were very good dev, that's why they were promoted to be dev lead, but the role changes. And the
Yeah.
second part of the question is what they should change about themselves when they become dev manager, like a manager of managers. So this is a two-part question.
Mm.
So if you can throw some light on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I'm the most qualified person to shed a light on anything. I'm not, because I learned it the hard way myself. So when I became a dev lead in 2007, early, 2007 February, I had been a really good developer before that. And you're right, most of the times people are promoted into dev manager or dev lead, depending on the company, or based on how good they were as an engineer. And but what happens is that development job is one where you have to go deep and you have to think big in terms of scalability of the system and the health of the system. But you become a dev lead or a manager, engineering manager, frontline manager, you have to think about empathizing with your developers as well. A lot of times you make a mistake, and I did that as well, which is what I assumed, or my assumption was that whatever I had been doing, my developers are going to be the continuation of what I was doing, meaning that I just feel that this stuff will be done, in this particular level of quality, in this, amount of code coverage by a certain time. Um, Luckily for me, I got a direct feedback from my direct report that, hey, Sumit, don't you should not think that that everybody else has the same level of velocity as you have had in building this kind of stuff before. And for a second, I thought, okay, that's an important point. That I'm very glad internally that somebody's telling me this. Otherwise, I would be making a lot of mistakes. I'll be assuming bad things, the wrong things, that it's going to take 2-3 days to do something, but rather it's going to take like 2 weeks to do something. So I think that's my advice to the new dev leads: to not really come to conclusions about how long something is going to take, and in how you gauge the performance of an individual. You also have to empathize with them, try to understand their viewpoint, why an estimation that they have provided is such versus what you have provided. And one of the things I introduced in my first team at that time was to introduce the wideband Delphi method for estimation. And how it works is that you have multiple people, multiple developers participate in estimating a feature, where a dev lead or a product manager, program manager explains the feature, brings their 1 or 2 page document first, and then everyone provides in a hidden way some estimate that this is number of hours is going to take. And the program manager or the dev lead puts it in an Excel sheet which computes the variance between different dev leads estimates. And the variance starts with 40-50% more than that as well in some cases. But what you want to get to is less variance, meaning people are thinking the same way. And how does that happen? After everybody has given anonymous estimates, then they talk about their assumptions, what they made to come up with an estimate like that. One will say, you know what, I felt that this component could be reused from another team. The other developer says, I did not account for test cases. Third one says, I did not think of how the dependencies are going to use our system. So I'm going to, think about that as well. So now 4 or 5 people sharing their assumptions, and then everybody feels like, gosh, I missed something. Let me add that in my estimate as well. So they revise their estimates and provide that to the dev lead or the program manager. And then you will see noticeably the variance goes down. And if the variance does not go below 20% or 15%, whatever you have added as a threshold, you have another round of assumptions discussion and the estimation one more time. And when you get to the 20%, you take the average, and that's your estimate. Now there is one issue with this approach. That is, the developers that are estimating will be from different experience levels. They're not going to be all senior developers or principal developers or the junior developers. It'll be mixed. In a way, it's a good thing. It also is, in a way, it's a little bit of a thing that one should pay attention to, where once you get the estimate and you assign that to the most junior person, it might be a little bit learning curve for them to get to that estimate, but they can always lean on other people. So anyways, estimation was one that helped the predictability of the team quite a bit. So that was the advice that I would give you to the dev lead, that to be more in the listening mode instead of telling them what to do, and then show empathy with others, and situationally lead different people.
Okay. And the second part of the question was, when you become the dev manager, the managers of manager, how things changes work-wise, and what you should change about yourself even.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question as well, and which is the second part of your question. At the dev manager level, or the group engineering manager at Microsoft, or the senior manager in some other companies, director in some other companies, what you really have to think about is you now need to let those tactical things be managed by the frontline manager, and you have to, as a dev manager, set the strategy. You have to set the roadmap of the team, where the team is going. You also have to help everybody write their goals in the form of objectives and key results. And those objectives and key results obviously have to align with all the other stakeholders, your peers, and they have to trickle down. And everyone of your direct reports will have to expand them, and their direct reports are going to expand them even further. So your job as a dev manager is going to be more on coaching and unblocking the dev lead, getting things that they need to make them successful, than going into each individual person's code review and giving comment, hey dev lead, you missed that, hey, why don't you take a look. So that shouldn't be your approach. Approach should be a little bit more room that needs to be given to the dev leads, and and work as a mentor, as a coach for them. But at the same time, also you have to manage up a little bit more, because now you have to set the strategy for your team, and also communicate upwards and sideways to your peers as well, so that you can keep alignment maintained.
True. So Sumit, I know you are a very successful dev lead. You are pretty successful in Microsoft, and later on different companies too. So if you have some tips which you can share with us, that how you remain so effective, right? Effective, being an effective manager, because I know you are very techie too. You are into technology, so you have not left that part also.
Yeah.
How you remain so effective in both fronts, being as a people manager and in technology also.
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, Look, we fortunately work in the field of technology, which does not become stale. And that is the best part of this industry that I work in, where you get to learn new things. In fact, I should say you have to learn new things, otherwise you'll become obsolete very quickly. If somebody comes and says, okay, look, Sumit, um, I want you to diagnose a bug in Turbo Pascal or C or older languages that you may have used in the past. It's a very rare incident that will happen. So if your team is now using Python, for example, very most popular language nowadays, or Java, second most popular. Um, so you have to try to understand the intricacies of these new technologies or benefits of them, as well as places where they can be used more effectively than the other stuff. Um, that'll help you make decisions. It'll help you um, make decisions that will have longer term impacts on your team. Imagine a case when you start leading a new team and you have to decide what technology should be used for databases. It may sound like a very simple question, but when your system is something that has to support hundreds of thousands of requests per second, and they have financial transactions, whatever that may be, it's very critical. And that means the retention, the backups, the replication, whole bunch of scenarios will come into your mind. So you have to do some homework in trying to understand what technology is best suited for that project. And your junior developers may just feel like, okay, this is the coolest technology I've been hearing. This is the keyword that is used in most of the jobs, so maybe that's the one that we should be working on. But you have to have a strategic view on why you should use the technology. You have to take a look at what company is supporting it, how the company's outlook looks like, who's the set of people that work at that company on that product. So you as an engineering leader have to do a little bit of a research in finding out why that decision is being made. So yeah, so being in the know is extremely important, however senior you are. And you have to be the sponsor of that, the call that you're making. So to summarize, that's one of the reasons why I have to be closer to the ground on the technology adoption or the decision we're making. Now on the other side, as an engineering manager, engineering leader, leading other managers as well, your job is to grow other people. Your job is to unblock them on doing other things. So that has to be the number one thing in your mind, because the manager is the face of the company for some of those people. Most of the people actually, because the manager is not good for them, they're not going to think much of the company as well. So you have to make sure that you're doing your best in being that manager that actually helps them, and rather puts blockers in their way. Um, but that does not mean that you'll not run into situations where there'll be a difficult conversation to be had, and then somebody is not performing that well, so you have to bring them out of that. So you have tons of scenarios around people management that you have to deal with. And although there are lots of trainings about people management, but when you're giving somebody a review and they start crying in the office with you, there is no textbook for that, to how to handle that scenario, right? Haven't you seen that? Or somebody starts yelling at you, right? There's no textbook that's going to tell you what to do in that case. So you're going to learn a few things by experience. You're going to learn a few things by showing empathy with others, and that's important.
True. Yeah. So next question I have, how you keep your team members motivated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's a super important question, really. And it applies to all levels of management. And I have a few points, solution to that. One is that you have to write your goals in objectives and key results format. And it is not something that is just a checklist item. It is because writing an objective at a higher level, that I want to improve the performance of something by a certain percentage. I want to acquire a number of customers, as many customers, 5x of the customer, whatever, like the metric you may use. Now below that, you have to write the key results that are going to make you achieve that objective. And if everybody in your team is aligned with or able to understand the objectives and key results, they're going to be able to break it down further and have a plan to execute on it, and then actually achieve that objective, and in fact in some cases beat that. So having objectives and key results give them clarity. It gives them a view of the future, where we are headed. And that's really part of translating from your roadmap, translating from your vision of what you want to achieve. So having clarity is extremely important. And I want to add a point here as well, that you might have heard that that people leave their job because of one or more of these three reasons. One is they don't like their manager they feel is not compatible with their needs. Second is that they're not getting enough money, or they feel like they can make more money, right? That's the money is another reason. Third reason, often underlooked, and it's extremely important, is that when the work is not exciting enough, or they feel like they're not learning new things. And I have changed my job because of that as well in the futures, in the past, I'm sorry. And so that's the point I want to try to make sure that folks understand that if they're given enough clarity about their work, about their expectations, then they tend to pay a lot of attention to that. That's number one thing, which is setting objectives and key results. And the second item is you have to celebrate small successes as well, which is somebody does a performance improvement of 20%, not a huge amount. You got to celebrate that. You have to make sure that is visible to everybody in the stakeholders list, that hey, this is something we have made. It has two or three different advantages. One is it shows incremental value your product is adding. You're gradually, marginally even growing the something and making something better. And that's like on the objectively the product. But what's most important about this is it helps the person, the individual who has done this, fixed a bug, or you add this performance enhancement, get that pat on the back that does not give them any extra money, but they feel like their effort is getting acknowledged, even when it is not that significant in their own minds. So celebrating small successes, whether they're individual or whether they're team success, it has to be done as well. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the second one. And third is that you have to reward people. If somebody does a good job, somebody does build something that becomes the next $1 billion product in the future, you have to reward such employees. You cannot take things for granted that yeah, he's a senior SD, he is supposed to do this. Yes, they are supposed to do this, they're supposed to solve bigger, harder problems, but something that has a real direct impact on the customers and the revenues of the company, you have to make sure that you're rewarding such employees. And rewards could be in the form of you know money, obviously, spot bonuses, good reviews, differentiating compensation basically for them. And so these are the things that will keep your team motivated. And when one person sees that the other person has gotten some rewards because of certain thing they've done, it will motivate them as well to do similar things.
Mm, Yeah, no, I think these are pretty good points you mentioned, and celebrating the small successes. That's where I think we fail often, because as a manager, and because of the speed, the pace of things changing around us is so much that we just focus on what's not working and fixing that, and generally we ignore our small successes and don't celebrate them. Yeah, I think these are important points. Um, Sumit, I would like to know, because you worked in multiple companies, and all these companies have their own way of doing things, and like Microsoft and even Visa and EA, and they build very complex product. These products are not very simple, so they have their own methodologies, patterns, and practices. So I would like to know, if you developing a product, what are the best practices you use?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a open question. That there's no correct answer for this, right? So I'm going to try to tell you what I feel like the practices could be, the things that have worked for me in the past. Um, Engineering practice it starts with writing goals. So I mentioned earlier as well the objectives and key results. Andy Grove came up with them when he was working at Intel. John Doerr, helped many other companies and wrote a book about it, Measure What Matters, about OKR. So there's enough literature about that. Um, and at Microsoft, you might remember we had these goals format in SMART format, which is specific, measurable, attainable, result oriented, and time bound. So any goal you write, and in fact, we used to call them commitments, so that it's more strong, a stronger word than just calling them goals. Yeah, I have resolution. That's not that. It's more a commitment. Um, so writing goals in the form of SMART format, which are used as the key result, and overall framework is objectives and key results. And you align these goals with your peers, with your direct reports and their direct reports, and also you have to trickle some down from your manager as well, from management as well. So that's the one thing that helps a lot. It helps you build a very clear cut picture of where you're headed and why are you doing this. and also tells people, like, in the next quarter, maybe, or next month, you're going to work on something that is not going to be super exciting, but after that a big reward is coming when we launch this feature, or when we acquire new customers. So I think the having clarity using objective key results is extremely important. That's number one point. The second is about the general engineering practices of running a team. There are two ways to do it mostly nowadays, what companies do. One is that you have a scrum based approach where you have product management, or engineering managers come up with this list of items, then you groom them, prioritize them, do a little estimation, and start pulling from the backlog into your sprints. And sprints are generally 2 weeks. Some companies, believe it or not, still have 3 week sprint, but not going to comment on that one. But yes, generally 2 weeks, and then you start burning down your backlog. um, Now, what happens during that time? We'll talk about that in a second. But second approach, instead of that one, is the Kanban approach, where you want to create more self-organized teams. You have maybe a feature lead person in that, or a scrum master, but rather you create these backlog of items which are on a board, and it says backlog or not started. And the second stage of that work item is going to be in progress, and the third one is going to be completed, and that will include testing and other things as well. The self-management is important in this aspect, where developers come in every day, they take one item from the backlog, put it into in progress, so put the picture on it, a magnetic one, if you have a physical board, but you can also do this in a virtual setting. The benefit of that approach is a manager does not have to tell the team member that, hey, why don't you take a work item, let's work on this one for your next sprint. People want to do things themselves because it gives them full control of what they can achieve. And there have to be a this process involves having visibility from the previous day to the next day, because the progress has to move, an item has to move in progression from one state to another, because each item that you put there is generally 8 hours or less. So that means when the team meets next day in a stand up, there has to be some movement of the work item. So when there's a movement, that means there's visibility, and that means people want to do more and more of these. They cannot basically not do stuff. And so that helps you manage, govern the team themselves. So that is about the regular project management. And then the third aspect I will add is the quality of your deliverables. How do you certify that the work item is done? Right? What is the definition of done? Does that mean having unit tests written, as well as having the code coverage to a certain percentage, 75, 80%, 90%, whatever your threshold in the beginning is? And then what's the status of these integration tests, where your components are being used by other components? And then what is the build verification test, or the environment verification test, or end-to-end test, whatever you call them in your company? So you have to write those as well, and check the sanctity of your product, then no bugs. um, at the end of the sprint, like, how many bugs are you able to tolerate to say yes, we are done, and then move on to the next layer. So all of these items are part of your checklist as engineering manager, that I want to have this much code coverage, I want to have this much passing of integration tests, I want to have gated check-ins, meaning that you make a code change, unit tests have to run in the background first, verify everything, code coverage has to set a certain percentage, only then the code will be checked in. But now another aspect that is related to that is the code reviews. How do you do code review? That's also part of checklist, that you create some pull request, change request, or whatever you call it. Different source controls have different names. Most people use Git, so I'm going to use Git terminology a little bit. So you have 2 or 3 developers that have to sign off on a pull request before it can be merged into the code base. And how do you do that? Do you just check for null conditions, or potential of memory leaks, or how do you really make sure a good code review happens? So there are 2-3 ways to do a good code review. One is that you just do it virtually by looking at the screen, verifying what's looking good, what's not. The second is you create a buddy build. Means that you take the changes from the other developer, you run them on your machine, or in a separate container, verify everything, analyze memory, analyze profiler, to see if there are no introduced memory leaks, no references to the objects are left out, the object pool is not getting full, that it has to recycle every time you make a call. So you have to do more than what a general visual code review does. That could be part of your checklist, and you may do that only for most critical components and not for everything. So yes, engineering checklists for before a code actually gets merged is an important part of engineering practice. And in fact, the third lastly, I will mention the importance of the continuous deployments as well. How often you deploy, and how can you test automatically using your integration tests you've written, and then how do you do A/B testing, and how do you do rolling deployments, rolling builds and deployments, etc. So tons of things. I can keep talking about this for a long time, but primarily you get the idea that you have to have some discipline in your practice, and it cannot just be all over the place and be open ended. Yeah, let's talk about documentation. So documentation, you have to categorize in for whom is this documentation for? Is this the documentation for a developer to do their job by writing a new feature, asking questions about a feature? If that's the case, if the feature is driven by the customer requirement and a program manager or a product manager is writing requirements, functional specification, as we generally call them, is a good idea, but um, it cannot be a spec that is just changing all the time. It cannot be for a feature that you're experimenting with. When you're experimenting with a new thing, you don't need to have a formal created spec. You can have your own design docs. You want to go deeper into design, how are you implementing this, and you can take feedback, inputs from other people in collaborative setting. But you cannot have a functional spec when you're still trying to define the problem space and not haven't come to the conclusion of what the solution is going to be. So for that, functional spec is not the most important instrument. For a customer requirement, functional spec is a good instrument, but design docs, or technical specs, you may call it technical specification documents, they're extremely important for any type of project. Now the third part of documentation, I feel, is what you give to your customers. You're writing APIs. Your API documentation is everything for that customer, because that's how they're going to get into your system, to use your system, to build their systems using that. So a poor documentation for APIs or anything else is not a good experience. You have to pay a lot of attention to that. You have to have sample code. You have to have interactive documentation where folks can run the API call right there in your portal, get some sample response. And you could also go next level by allowing a virtual login to your portal, documentation portal, and having a singular experience for that customer where they can use their own data, which gets saved in some temporary storage somewhere, and they can use the output of that data to make more API calls and get to learn the system, and then go to convince their management, hey, yeah, we want to buy this product service because it's much easier to use, document is simple, and we want to go there. And lots of new companies have built documentation like that in the recent history that have been remarkably successful as well. Um, I can give some examples. I'm not sure if that's prudent, but you can look for modern documentation examples which are interactive, and you'll find tons of those use cases. Yeah.
Yes. Good. Thank you. Sumit, I know you hired a lot of people in your career in these different companies. What you look for in a candidate, if when you are interviewing somebody, and the kids who are coming out of school and trying to apply to these companies, uh, what they should prepare for, anything different they should do, and specifically more so, I think, what you will look for in a candidate.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've hired lots of people, hundreds of people in my career, and you know what works the best is, and again, I'm going to divide this question into two parts. One is when you're trying to hire somebody who's a developer, who's a software engineer, and then when you're hiring somebody who's an engineering manager. For software engineers, now we're going to talk about all the different levels, new grad and also a senior principal level engineer. You want to talk to them about data structures and computer science algorithm problems, but there is a platform nowadays where kids can practice called Lead Code, and you have a categorization of problems in easy, medium, or hard. As a manager, however, you have to also know about that platform. You have to also have a little practice on that one to be able to modify and tweak the questions that folks are preparing for. Because when you add that dynamic element into the question, that's when you really test the individual's capabilities in dealing with slight variation and ambiguity in the problem, if they, maybe if they practice, 10 questions that are medium, and you happen to ask exactly one of those 10 questions, they will know the answer, right? But if you modify that a little bit, add a slight change in it, can they tackle that as well or not, is this a question. I'll give you an example of that. You have a very basic question about doing a binary search or finding an elements index from a rotated sorted array, a sorted array which has been rotated. So now binary search can still be applied, but you have to modify that a little bit. And then how can you do that when it's in a matrix form? It's a 3 by 3 matrix, and there are 9 actual elements, and the whole thing spirals like that. So that way you have to be able to navigate in a spiral format instead of navigating linearly. Can you apply the same binary search algorithm on that to find the answer that you're looking for? And people might have some innovative approaches to tackle that. Some people will get bewildered by the question because they have never seen that question before. But you want to be able to look for those folks that can handle the new problems and use their raw intellectual horsepower to solve them, right? So that's one. And the second part of the questions that you're going to ask these individuals is going to be about systems design questions. And system design is basically software architecture questions. Building a new system, like you build a email marketing platform a long time ago when I was working with you, which was basically for mass communication via emails, texts, and
Yeah,
other.
I remember we were sending 5 to 20,000 email per minute.
Yeah, yeah. So
Personalized email.
yeah, that's really cool, right? And again, nowadays it is a Twilio format. There's another set of platform products that do similar thing, right? My point was going to be that the way you design the system may not be exactly how the other people might design the same system. They may have a different approach to solving that distributed systems problem. So what you want to ask these individuals is, how would they solve certain problems like that? How would they build a Zoom, for example, and be able to scale it to millions, billions of people? Maybe billions is a stretch, but still, lots of people, linearly increasing that. Now, you want to be able to listen to how they would have solved this problem, and you also have to see whether they've just crammed it from somewhere. But the least experienced people really have not built many distributed systems, so they're not going to be super savvy in them, so you're going to give them some grace. But as the individuals, software engineers, are increasing in their levels, the ones that are interviewing with you, you're going to increase the percentage of systems designs questions and reduce the code questions for them. Now, these are the two questions which are really just objective, technical design or technical coding questions. But the third part is about these behavioral questions, where they want to see whether they are really battle tested or not. You're going to give them some problem about a difficult scenario that happened in the office with them 2-3 years ago, or in the last year, last 6 months, and see how they reacted to that, how did they solve that problem. And these are real world problems. Here, you're not checking how you would solve the problem. You're really checking how did they actually solve the problem in the past. So there is often a technique used STAR for such scenarios, is a situation, task, action, and result of whatever that actually happened. And when you're hiring engineering managers, you're going to focus a lot on those behavioral aspects than and also system design, but rather than asking a lot of coding questions, which they've done. They didn't become engineering manager right out of college, right? They also did a lot of development before. So that's how I will say, summarize on the interviewing approach: coding questions, variation wise, systems design, and behavioral questions. For engineering managers, less coding, more system design, and a lot more behavioral set of questions.
Right. I think it's a very good tip about the STAR thing you said: situation, task, action, and result. Like what action you took and what was the result. So all your questions should be in the STAR format.
Correct. Answer should be in STAR format. Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Very, very good. Yeah. So Sumit, tell me the best management advice you ever got.
So I'm laughing about this because the answer I'm going to give you is also is the best advice, and also it's not such a good advice actually.
Actually, my second question is that the worst management advice and the best management advice.
Okay, so let me then give you just one answer, common one for these two questions. early in my career, I took on a work item which I did terribly on. I did an abysmal job at finishing that work item, and my manager pulled me aside and said, "Hey, look, in, here is a principle that you should keep in mind. Whatever task you're given, you have to do 25% more of that." And now it's a very interesting advice. And me, young developer, took it to the heart and decided to do more every time that I would go into the office, and I would try to do more and more and more, because I could never really understand what that extra 25% means. Does that mean 25% extra lines of code, 25% extra impact, 25% extra revenues for the company? What does that really even mean, and what you should be doing? um, it's a good advice for me, because I challenge myself with that, and I always try to do more. And looking back, I look at all the rating systems in the companies I've worked at. There have always been a top rating, and then there's a medium rating or variations of that, and there's a bottom rating, right? So the people that get the top ratings mostly are the people that have gone above and beyond, have done more than what they ever given. So my manager, at least in a way, was very honest in telling me that is the case. Most people will not say that, because that will be issue, right? um, I'm going to question, how is that possible? I have these work right now, these are my goals. Now you're saying I have to do 25% of more of that. Let's say I found the 25%, I added them as well. Then what does that mean? 100%. I have to add
Mhm.
25% more. So I think that was a advice that was a good advice for me. Bad advice, because it's not something that we should be using in with leisure, by telling developers, hey, whatever you given, do 25% more, because people will try to quantify that, and it's not an easy way to quantify it. So I think that's, yeah, the both questions answers the same. The best advice is that, the worst advice is also that. Looking back, I feel like, really, I mean, did I really have to do that extra stuff? When you know I feel
Mhm.
like it wasn't necessary. But
And it
yes,
becomes
that's
and it becomes the best advice for you, because that always made you strive to get 25% more whatever you were given, without knowing what is
yeah,
25% is, but you
exactly.
always tried hard. Maybe that's why you were working late night in Microsoft every day.
Well, that's probably part of it, but mostly the reason was that I wanted to, internally, I wanted to do more than what was given to me, and I wanted to improve the experience more. And that was much after that advice was given to me, so that was a little bit
Okay.
earlier. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, Sumit, tell me something about your failures. I want to
yeah.
know where you failed and how did you come out of it and how did it change? So
Yeah,
this is again to motivate our audience. Our audience is are the young kids coming out of college, starting their career. And
yeah.
so I would like to know if you can share something. It can be professional or personal. It's okay.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy to share my, fail. I mean, I have tons of failures. Either about projects that didn't go as I planned, and things happen. But I will tell you the one that people can, take some things away from. Um, I took an internal transfer in one of my jobs, and I inherited a team, and and I felt like, gosh, this is the same company. Been working in the other location, now to this location, so maybe things are just going to be a continuation of what I was doing. Again, the same mistake I made when I was a new manager. But what I did not understand properly was that I had to be in the listening mode. I had to understand how the team was doing things that they were doing. I had to, first actively listen, build a rapport with the team, and then pivot to whatever my opinion was going to be. That was the recipe I should have followed, which I didn't know. Rather, what I did was I went in and I said, you know what, I don't think the performance of the system is that good. I don't think the testing is that good. So here is an approach of how we should do testing. And some teams may need that from you. Some teams may need you to really decide and they do something decisive that helps them move forward. But some teams really are not like that. Most teams, rather, you want to, when you join them, you want to just listen and understand what's going on, rather than coming to conclusions about what needs to be done. So my biggest learning is that I should not have made my viewpoints presented in the first place. I should have spent time trying to understand, what's working, and I should have tried to understand who are the major influencers, decision makers, the most, expert coders, etc. So so I feel like, that if I were to do that again, I would not take the same approach, because you want to establish that rapport with the people, and that you will be working with you, reporting to you for a long time. So that's my advice, that people, when you join a new job, whether it's external job, whether you're just taking an internal transfer, think of every team, every part, sub team, or a sub group of a company as a micro culture that you're going to be facing.
Mm, mm. Okay, yeah, that's important advice. So what was the failure there? Is you shaken the cages too early in the team before you understood?
Yeah, I think so. I think the failure really is that, at any point of time in that team, didn't feel like, I had built a really solid rapport with the team. They
Mm,
always would try to basically have some opinion about how things should be done.
mm,
And I think this is not like a drastic failure where the things didn't work, and then people had to leave, etc. But it is a case where, right, whether you're really doing really well in the team, whether you're making an impact, whether things are moving forward at the pace that you want or not, right? So you will know that. It's not that
right.
it wasn't clear to me, and I realized that I internalized that it was, it could have been a different result if I had actually just spent time on listening and understanding before presenting my ideas. And I'll also tell this another advice to your audience. There is a retired FBI hostage negotiator, the name of Chris Voss, and he created this technique of hostage negotiation, that talks about actively listening, then showing empathy, then building rapport with the person that you're talking with, whether they're hostage holder, or whether who is somebody you're working with in business. And then
I think he wrote a
finally,
book also, some negotiation, something, right?
yeah, I think he wrote a book as well. I think his book is called Never Split the Difference.
Never
And
split the difference, right? You're right.
and
Yes.
and, and the example he gives about that is, and the last step, before I give the name of the example, the last step was to basically pivot to what you want to be done.
Huh.
And that is the part he mentions in his book. And the example he says is that he says, I go to a bar, and I'm sitting in the bar, and I got my drink, and then I go to the bathroom. A big guy comes in and takes his seat. The big guy sitting there, and then Chris goes and says, "Okay, so that was my seat." And the guy says, "Get the whatever out of here, and then this is my seat now." And then Chris Voss says, "What should I do? Split this difference with him? Should I sit in his lap? Should I sit under the tree? What should I do?" So basically, sometimes there is no like splitting the difference. It's not like meet me at the halfway. He says that's the most terrible thing you can do.
Yeah.
So there's no meeting the halfway. There is actually, and also he says there's no winner and loser scenario when you're negotiating. Uh, but I would recommend your audience to either get his book, which is Never Split the Difference, or watch his TED talks, or watch his masterclass, which is phenomenal, that he has done.
Oh, okay.
Masterclass is a is a platform where these industry leaders, in their
Hmm.
fields, teach people some
Right.
lessons,
Oh,
music.
nice. I heard about his book, and I think he gave a talk in Google or somewhere, but I didn't know about that. He has a master class too. I think, yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is. It is important. I know a friend of mine. He's doing some executive MBA kind of thing from
Mhm.
Stanford, and there this book is almost a must read. The split the
All
difference.
right,
Yeah.
that's great.
So good. My last question: if you'd like to, recommend some more books
Mhm.
for to our audience.
Yeah, I would say the John Doerr's book of Measure What Matters is a good book, and
Hmm.
that will help you how to set the goals. And in the book, he talks about meeting with Google founders early when they were not big. He met with the Bono of U2 to help set goals for him, and he talks about learning these things from Andy Grove himself, who actually came up with the objectives and key results ideas in 60s or 70s when he was at Intel. So, highly recommended book. One of my favorite books today is that.
Okay, cool. So thank you very much, Sumit. I really appreciate you taking time on a Sunday to speak to us. I really appreciate. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and thanks for all the things you've been doing, and good luck to you as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Bye.